by Alex Newman with the New American Magazine. He's the author of several books, including Crimes of the Educators, co-authored with the late, great Dr. Samuel L. Blumenfeld. Alex, you're about to launch an ongoing series of speaking engagements across the country. Talk a little bit about your upcoming engagements and what it is that you're going to be presenting.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me, Chuck. It's great to be with you again.
Yeah.
And so earlier this year, on February 4th, we put out this special report in the New American Magazine. It's called "Rescuing Our Children," and it's kind of a continuation of the work that Dr. Blumenfeld and I did in Crimes of the Educators. I know you were very good friends with Sam.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we did was we tried to put it in a very simple, easy to read package. We're hoping to get 1 million of these out. And to complement that, I launched a speaking tour this summer. We left in mid-May and traveled all across the country. I took my family with me. We got a trailer, and we did, I think, 60 engagements across more than 30 states. Talking about what's happened in the public school system, how they're deliberately dumbing down the kids, how they're indoctrinating the kids. I mean, it's getting to the point now where they're trying to convince kindergartners that they can mutilate their genitals and be the opposite sex. I mean, it would blow people's minds if they knew this. And so I'll be coming up to New England this week, actually. I'll be flying out October 25th for a series. It's kind of like a continuation, a mini speaking tour. I have engagements in New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Pennsylvania. I think 6 or 7 maybe, and hopefully I'll see people there. You can find all the dates at libertysentinel.org/tour. And what we're really urging people to do, Chuck, is to, first of all, protect their own children from this, right? Get your children out immediately. And second of all, help raise awareness, because a lot of parents, in fact, I would argue that the overwhelming majority of American parents do not realize the enormity of this problem. And it's not just your kids that are at risk here. I mean, it is literally the future of this country, the future of our liberty. If we don't address this, you can kiss it all goodbye.
Talk a little bit specifically about what is going on in the public schools. And again, we're talking here elementary level. What, they keep the parents outside the door. They don't know what's going on. They tell the children really not to discuss what's going on. They're not allowed to take papers off of the school property. Parents can get in trouble if they do that. So give us some insight in terms of what is going on behind the school door, if you will.
Yeah, well, thank you for the opportunity to do that, Chuck. And, again, I consider this to be the most important issue facing America today. And I think it's a crisis that if we don't get a handle on it, we are going to lose everything. So, we break it down into a few components. I mean, on the one hand, parents send their children to school thinking that they're going to learn how to read, how to write, how to do math, how to think, maybe some facts about history and maybe science. In fact, nothing could be further from the truth. And you don't have to take my word for it. The federal government pumps out huge amounts of data showing this to be the case. Last year, they released the latest results from their National Assessment of Educational Progress. And what the federal government's own data showed is that less than 1/3 of high school seniors are even proficient in reading, right? The totally dumbed down standards, and not even 1/3 of high school seniors are proficient on these standards. Then you have math. Less than 1/4 of high school seniors are proficient in math. So we spent 12 years and maybe $150,000 supposedly educating these children, and millions of them are graduating unable to even read their own high school diploma. So part of this goes back to what Dr. Blumenfeld was always exposing, the horrific so-called literacy programs that they have that don't actually teach reading, that end up handicapping these children. We've known this quackery doesn't work since the 1840s, and yet it's still in place under Common Core. So that's a big part of it, is the dumbing down, the fake history, the fake science, the ridiculous math, the quack methods to teach reading, the removal of all the great literature, and replacing it with propaganda about gender and climate and this kind of stuff. So that in and of itself is bad enough. Parents think their kids are going to get an education. They're not, right? Not any education that a normal person would recognize as an education. And second of all, there's the indoctrination component of this. They are now teaching children in kindergarten that homosexuality is good and normal, that they should believe in transgenderism. They're teaching kindergartners to choose their own pronouns, right? Do you want to be a he or a she or a z or a they, or all these things that even 2-3 years ago people would have looked at you like you had something wrong in your head if you said this kind of stuff. This is now what's gone down all the way to kindergarten. We have drag queens coming into these schools, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, wearing demon horns and strip tease and Some of them are convicted pedophiles, teaching the kids that all this LGBT stuff is great. They're teaching them a fake version of American history. They're teaching them pseudoscience under the guise of teaching them science. So on the one hand, we have this deliberate dumbing down of America that is literally depriving children not just of an education, but of the ability to educate themselves. Right? If you can't read, you can't get access to the accumulated knowledge of mankind. And then on the other hand, you have this indoctrination teaching children to be socialists, right? The majority, even of millennials now, and it's even worse among Generation Z, now describe themselves as socialists in every poll that you look at. Right? They weren't born socialists. My 2-year-old recognizes the importance of private property. Take his teddy bear away. They give me that. That's my teddy bear. Right?
Right.
Little
It's
kids
natural,
understand
of
it.
course.
That's right. And they're turning them against God. There's been studies done that children in every culture, right? Every culture, doesn't matter what culture you come from, children have an innate understanding that they were created by a loving, benevolent creator. And, they can't, quote the Old Testament for you, for example, but they do understand that they were created, that there is a creator. And yet you have the majority of, for the first time ever in American history, we now have a majority of millennials, an entire generation, a majority which rejects even the existence of God, right? So this is going to be catastrophic. And even if people are like, well, I don't care if people believe in God or not, our country is founded on a very important premise. It's founded on the premise, and our founding fathers didn't think this was a religious statement. They actually called it a self-evident truth that God created us and that God gave us rights. Well, if you reject the existence of God, which the people who created our public school system did, then, of course, you have no reason why there should be any inherent rights, right? If we can get 51% of people to get rid of those rights, then, hey, they're gone, right? And that's the direction we're moving in, Chuck. So what we argue is that our political institutions, our freedoms, our Constitution, these are not going to survive another generation of this. That's how important it is that we deal with this crisis.
Well, I mean, if you take away the idea that God is the creator of the universe and is the giver of law and logos, if you will, then you have them believing that these elites can create the universe. They've replaced God with themselves. This is the great lie of the Garden of Eden, that they can be like gods. And, I'm not saying that your average teacher is conscious of this. They probably grew up with this sort of ideology and they imbibed it at an early age themselves. They're now teaching it, and it's a world that they live in. But to mention God in your school is not only is it unfashionable, which it certainly was maybe 10 years ago, but now you get in trouble. You could get expelled from school. You have to be afraid to speak out in that way. Somehow the idea that you would be a believer in God, that you would be a supporter of President Trump in public as a student, it's seen as automatically labeling you as an offender of someone else. That this idea, and it does offend them, I suppose, because it offends their sensibilities, but they feel this sense of entitlement that they can then use the authoritarian levels of the system to drum you out, and they feel justified in doing that. And of course, young people, students, kids, they don't want to have to, they're not equipped to go up against the system. They want to get along with people, they want to get along with their fellow students, and they want to get through school. Even I would say this is true of most college students. They want to keep their head low and get through it. But people on the outside like yourself and others, we're trying to expose it and trying to pierce that veil and demonstrate the truth, strip away, show that the emperor is naked. And by doing so, hopefully people are going to start to step up at the plate and take a swing at this.
Yeah, you just said some things that are so important, Chuck. I think they're worth emphasizing again. About this religion that's being taught in the schools, we really should view it as a religion. In fact, the idea that mankind can be his own God and can decide for himself what's right and wrong, that is the lie that goes straight back to the Garden of Eden. And that is the religious belief system that now has taken over our school system. John Dewey, he's almost universally recognized as the founding father of America's public education system. And in fairness, some of the blame deserves to go back to, Horace Mann and even to Robert Owen, proto-communist who set up this failed commune. I've actually been writing a series on this socialist, communistic origins of the public school system in the Epoch Times, where I trace all of this. But John Dewey was open about his religion. He was one of the signers and actually a key figure within the creation of the first Humanist Manifesto, where they outlined their religion. And the very first tenet was a direct repudiation of Genesis 1:1. Right, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I mean, that is an incredibly profound statement with incredibly important implications for somebody's worldview. If in the beginning there was a God who created, then that has a lot of implications. Well, John Dewey and company, right, they created this first Humanist Manifesto. The first tenet was religious humanists, and to their credit, they acknowledged this was a religion, and I think that that deserves to be noted, because it was a religion, and it was honesty on their part to admit that it was a religion. They had faith that the universe is self-existing and there is no God. I mean, that's what they said in the very first tenet of this. And that became, over time, the official religion of the United States. The First Amendment prohibited Congress from passing any laws respecting an establishment of religion. Well, the Supreme Court came along and actually created a national religion with these rulings in 1962 and 1963, where they basically turned John Dewey's religion into the official religion of the state. They mandated that it would have to be supported by our taxes, and they mandated that it would be taught to our children. Basically, this idea that there is no God, and that science disproves God, and we can't have Bible, we can't have prayer, we can't have it. It actually came down to a case in New York where the state of New York had ordered that a prayer be said in school. It was developed by Jewish, Protestant, and Catholic leaders. So it was totally non-sectarian. We just acknowledge, hey, God, we're dependent on you. And the Supreme Court said, no, the First Amendment, which prohibits Congress from passing any laws, prohibits the state of New York now. They said, hey, we're going to incorporate this down to the states from having any kind of prayer in schools. Well, first of all, anybody who knew anything about American history would have instantly recognized this fraud, right? Most of the states at the time that the First Amendment was written and ratified actually had established churches. So clearly this was never intended to prohibit the state of New York from having a prayer in school. Second of all, there was one justice on the court who recognized what was happening here. His name was Potter Stewart, and he actually explained that what this ruling did, and the one that came in 63 with the banning the Bible, was not to create a state of neutrality with respect to religion, but actually to establish the religion of secularism, is how he put it. John Dewey would have called it the religion of humanism, but it's the same thing as the official religion of the United States. And the implications of this are huge. This is the worldview now that several generations of American children have grown up with without even realizing that's their worldview. They just think that's objective reality because that's all they were taught by this religious government education system. And the numbers are clear. The Nehemiah Institute did a study. They found that something like 80% of American children, Christian children from Christian homes with Christian parents who spend 12 years in a public school system, are going to end up leaving their church by the time they're done. I'm sure the numbers are very similar with Jewish children who go through 12 years of public school, will end up leaving their synagogue, will end up leaving their faith. And this is catastrophic. It's having catastrophic effects. We can see it all around us. Kids didn't used to shoot each other at school. Kids didn't used to commit suicide. Kids didn't used to get addicted to heroin. Kids didn't used to fornicate and abort their children before all this became the norm in American schools. And yet this is where we are today, Chuck.
John Dewey also signed the first Humanist Manifesto, which codified the theory of evolution.
That's right.
And which, of course, is a pseudoscientific theory. I mean, you could say it's science if you want, but the fact is that it basically, gets rid of God. It says that man evolved out of a warm pond and just through this bizarre dialectical process became man somehow. I mean, it's about as magical as anything that, they claim religion is, which is not. But from that, I think that you had Julian Huxley, who was the founder of UNESCO. He was the first leader of UNESCO, and whose grandfather was the main promoter of Darwinism, who basically implemented theological humanism. And he said, look, we're going to leave in place all the trappings of religion around the world. We'll leave the glass, the stained glass windows and the ceremonies and the physical manifestations. But the belief system, the theology, the philosophy will be replaced with humanism, and it will become universal, and that all religions in the de facto sense will be the same. And there's some very interesting things he wrote. I mean, it's kind of a key figure in terms, because UNESCO was seen as the school board of the world. And the United States got out of it under Reagan, which was great. But nevertheless, the influence is very profound. And this has been the ethos of our schools, as the public schools, that if you accept the idea that there's no God and that there's no creator of the universe who created an objective body of law, or logos, as the Greeks called it, then you have the fact that these people, these elites, can make up the law. They can decide anything they want. They can decide whether you're male or female. They can decide anything. I mean, they can invent realities. This is the core of the Marxist dialectic. And that's the ethos right now that is predominating in our schools and as such in our culture. And it is one that is, it's authoritarian. It's not, it's a bill of goods. It doesn't lead to a sovereign individual under God, which is the American model, which is the best natural model for man.
Yeah, I mean, so much important stuff there, Chuck. It's just amazing. There's not one in a million people who understand. It's such a pleasure to talk to people like you, because you actually know this stuff. And Sam Blumenfeld's friends do know that kind of stuff, but the vast majority of the American people have no idea. So one of the things we did in this special report, we've got a whole article on what you were talking about involving UNESCO. That's the direction we're moving toward. We are moving toward. So here we have it. It's education's future, globalization of indoctrination, and that's the direction this is all moving in. The UNESCO is moving now to take over education globally. They've got what they call their World Core Curriculum, which was developed by Undersecretary General Robert Mueller. And this guy, I mean, if you read his religious beliefs, this guy was absolutely bonkers. I mean, he called the UN the body of Christ.
And he was like a mystical kind of New Age, Helena Blavatsky, theosophy kind of stuff and it's, by the way, extremely racist and anti-Semitic as well, I might point out.
That's exactly right. It is.
And this is the religion of the UN. I mean, they actually have a meditation room that's dedicated to it.
That's right. And it all goes back to Helena Blavatsky and Alice Bailey, one of her disciples. In fact, it's really fascinating because Robert Mueller, again, these people were so honest in that they told us what they were doing. Robert Mueller.
Let me just interject briefly here. When we're talking about Robert Mueller, we're not talking about the brown shirts that tried to take Trump out.
Right. Yeah,
and then, exactly. And those. All right, go on.
Yeah. And so, no relation as far as I know between the two Robert Muellers. But this Robert Mueller who developed the World Core Curriculum, and you can read this on the UN's website. I mean, the World Core Curriculum is there. They say they want it taught in every school on the planet. They'll openly tell you that Common Core is part of an international program where kids in Shanghai will learn the same thing as kids in Chicago. But Robert Mueller put together a teacher's manual for his World Core Curriculum. He wanted this in every school on the planet. And in this teacher's manual, in the foreword to it, written in his own words, he says that this is based on the teachings of Alice Bailey and this Tibetan teacher, Javal Kool, is how Robert Mueller refers to him. Well, Alice Bailey, as we just alluded to, was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. She was a disciple of this Russian mystic Helena Blavatsky, who got it into her head that somehow Lucifer was the good guy and Jehovah God in the garden was this mean, oppressive, keeping Adam and Eve down and depriving them of knowledge. And then Lucifer came along and freed them from this kind of ignorance. So they basically take the biblical story from Genesis and flip it upside down. And you have Robert Mueller, the guy who created the World Core Curriculum for the UNESCO, saying that the teachings are based on the writings of this lady. And of course, Javal Kool. Alice Bailey claimed to be in communication with these spiritual entities. She described them as ascended masters. And the chief of them was this Javal Kool. He wasn't actually a teacher. He wasn't Tibetan. It was, depending on your beliefs, either a figment of her imagination or, if you read your Bible, it sounds very suspiciously like the demonic forces, the satanic forces that are described. And so she said that these beings would take over her body and write. And you can go get her books. Right? I have some of them. She's got one that she wrote with the help of these ascended masters or whatever called Education in the New Age. And everybody ought to read this because the guy who wrote the World Core Curriculum is telling us that it's based on, the education of the future is going to be based on Alice Bailey's work. Well, what did Alice Bailey say? Read her book. She says we need a world federation for all of humanity. We need a world religion. We need a world brain. We need to fuse Marxism and neo-scholasticism to create this kind of utopia. And she says we're going to use the methods advocated by John Dewey, to come full circle back to John Dewey. So this is where all this is going. And, you know, American parents in particular, you have the freedom to protect your children from this, right? Every state in the union in America today, you have the freedom as a parent to remove your child from this. And I would say it's not just the freedom, you have a duty to do it. I mean, now that you know this is what your children are being exposed to, you know they're being dumbed down, you know they're being exposed to all these kinds of negative influences, you know what happens. I mean, look at the kids graduating from the schools. You have not just the right, but the obligation to protect your children from this.
Absolutely. It's the most basic and fundamental element of any moral society, to protect the innocence of your children, to go in and find out what's going on. It's very difficult for a parent to do that because you don't want to have your child ostracized or, you know, in any way singled out. And that's, of course, the power they use to keep people out. I would say that, you know, you could go in after your child graduates if you feel that fearful of it. But somehow we have to, in a sense, get through that wall and get into there and expose it. And, you know, this is a very, very evil agenda. And it can only be addressed on a local level, person by person, neighborhood by neighborhood, city and town by city and town. It's really the only way to take this on. And then you build a critical mass. So, Alex, I admire what you're doing. You're touring around several cities. Talk a bit about your tour and how that's happening and where you're going to be.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Chuck. So I will be flying to Philadelphia on October 25th. And then I've got an event the morning of the 26th. Then there's going to be a Protect Your Children rally. I think it's in Flemington, New Jersey. That's going to be a big rally. You'll have the mayor there in New Jersey who's spoken out against this LGBT mandatory agenda in the schools. You'll have some of the state senators and legislators who are involved in opposing this. So that'll be on October 26th in Flemington at, I think it's called My Father's House. You need to register if you want to go. Then after that, I'll be going to New York, Connecticut. Got some events there. One of the big ones will be in Albany, New York. And New York is really right at the heart of this because, you know, we're talking about parents protecting their children and putting them in alternative forms of education. Well, now the state of New York is coming after Jewish schools. You know, this is now a big controversy. They want to force all these Jewish schools to teach the government's version of education instead of, you know, what they believe ought to be part of a good education. So, you know, New York is on the front lines here of the government's assault on the ability of parents to provide a good education for their children. So we'll be all over New York. I'll be on Long Island. If people want to come out and see these events, you know, I break it down in an hour. .org/tour, and you have the contact people, the dates, the times, the places, all that kind of information there. And, you know, after that mini speaker tour, I'll come back. Then I'll be going to Nevada. I've got some events there. Then after that, I'll come back. Then I'm going to Idaho for a mini speaking tour up there. Early next year, I'll be in Utah. So I'm going to be traveling around a lot doing this. You can find all that at libertysentinel.org/tour. And then if people want to know, you know, the inside scoop, what's really happening, it's a very, very simple tool. Anybody can read this in a couple hours. It'll cost you a few bucks. You know, we'll even pay the shipping and handling. Go to thenewamerican.com/rescuing our children. That's the title of this report, Rescuing Our Children. The whole issue is dedicated to what's going on in the public schools and what we can do about it. And we're hoping to get 1 million copies of these out, Chuck. We're making good progress. We're now, I think, on our 6th or our 7th printing. We're going to be going back to the printer again very soon. But, you know, we can't do it without the help of everybody. You know, so if you watch this, if you read this and you think, wow, he's right. You know, our society is not going to survive another generation or two of this. I've got to get involved somehow. Even if your kids are already graduated or you don't have kids, order 10 or order 20 or order 100. We've got some people who've ordered 1,000 and give them out. You know, give them to your pastor, to your rabbi, to your school board members, to your neighbors, whoever needs this information. We're counting on individual Americans who love this country, who love God, who love their children, who love their freedoms, to get involved in this fight. And everybody's got to do something. Nobody's going to do this for us, guys. We've got powerful forces arrayed against us. They've got, you know, the education establishment against us. They've got the media establishment against us. But the truth is more powerful than their lies. And with concerted action by individuals out there who get involved, we really can turn the tide. We've already got 15% of American children are being educated outside of the system. If we can bump that up another 20 or 30%, we'll be in real good shape.
All right, Alex. Also, how do people view your YouTube channel?
Yeah, we've got lots. One of the big ones that we do is the New American. So go to YouTube, type in New American Video, the New American Magazine video. You'll find our channel there. We've got all kinds of content on education, international affairs, politics, you name it. We've got it there. I've got my own personal one. It's at Liberty Sentinel. And then, of course, subscribe and like this channel here. Chuck Morris, obviously, you do amazing work. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
And yeah, if people put my name into YouTube and, any topic here, YouTube's doing their best not to suppress stuff. Some of the videos I've done that have, hundreds of thousands of views, you can't even find them anymore on YouTube. They're
Yes,
really
I
trying
know.
to bury it. But you can find it if you work hard, put my name in any topic, and you should find stuff.
Excellent. All right, Alex Newman. Listen, thanks so much for joining me. Let's stay in touch. Maybe keep me posted as the tour progresses, and we can do some more programming.
Thank you so much, Chuck. Really appreciate it.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.